U.S.-China trade disruption. The U.S.-China trade relationship is experiencing one of the most turbulent periods in modern history, with far-reaching economic consequences rippling throughout global supply chains. Record-breaking tariff rates have triggered a sequence of events causing unprecedented instability in international commerce. Billions in canceled orders. The United States has unilaterally canceled orders worth billions of dollars from China after tariff rates reached historic highs. This decision is not merely an economic maneuver, but reflects a broader geopolitical strategy by the U.S. to reduce dependence on the world's largest manufacturer. In the context of escalating economic tensions, America has pushed tariffs to unprecedented levels, with threats of increases up to 104% on some Chinese imports. For American businesses, the cost of importing goods from China has become prohibitively expensive, forcing them to reconsider their entire supply chain strategies. Many companies, from major retail corporations to consumer electronics manufacturers, have had no choice but to cancel existing orders and suspend future purchasing plans. According to the video data, the volume of canceled orders has reached staggering figures, affecting thousands of manufacturing facilities in China and triggering waves of worker layoffs at major production centers. Container congestion at Chinese ports. A direct consequence of this wave of order cancellations is an unprecedented bottleneck at China's major seaports. Over 25,000 containers with an estimated value of approximately $2.8 billion are currently stranded at major ports like Shanghai and Shenzhen. These crucial logistics hubs have transformed into massive container graveyards, where manufactured goods cannot find their way to consumer markets. These containers are filled with merchandise previously ordered by American companies, from consumer electronics, clothing, and toys to manufacturing components, now caught in a commercial limbo. Many Chinese factories completed production before the official order cancellations, resulting in a surplus of goods without buyers. Shipping companies face increased storage costs and disrupted delivery schedules. This congestion affects not only U.S.-China trade, but creates ripple effects throughout global maritime transportation operations. Supply chain shift to Southeast Asia. Facing insurmountable tariff pressures, American companies are scrambling to redirect their supply chains to Southeast Asian nations such as Vietnam, Thailand, and Indonesia. The China Plus One strategy has evolved into Southeast Asia Plus One, as businesses seek alternative sources with competitive labor costs and more favorable tariff environments. However, theory and reality are proving to be entirely different matters. Manufacturing capacity in Southeast Asian countries is already overloaded. Factories in Vietnam, considered the most promising alternative to China, are operating beyond capacity, with waiting times for new orders extending to several months. Similarly, Thailand and Indonesia are struggling to meet the sudden surge in demand from American companies. Additionally, logistics costs are skyrocketing due to shipping demand concentrated on new routes. While China's logistics infrastructure has been developed over decades to handle enormous trade volumes, Southeast Asian countries are still in the process of upgrading their ports, roads, and distribution centers. This creates bottlenecks in the supply chain, increasing delivery times and costs. According to the video data, this supply source migration strategy is causing many American companies to fall into a situation of jumping from the frying pan into the fire, escaping the tariff pressure from China, but facing higher costs, longer production times, and lower reliability from new suppliers. Hardened stance of Chinese manufacturers. As trade tensions escalate, Chinese manufacturers are displaying a notably hardened attitude. Despite enormous pressure from American buyers, they firmly refuse to lower product prices to offset rising tariffs. This decision reflects a changing mindset among Chinese manufacturers, who are gradually pivoting toward other markets and adapting to a new global trade environment. For many Chinese factories, further price reductions would make business operations financially unviable, especially as they have already faced rising labor costs and stricter environmental regulations in recent years. Instead, They are focusing on diversifying export markets, boosting domestic sales, and moving up the value chain with higher value-added products. This standoff is only escalating, delaying shipments, inflating costs, and ultimately, it's the American consumer who's left holding the bill. Consumer goods prices in the U.S. have already begun to rise, reflecting higher import costs, and experts predict that inflationary pressures will continue to mount if the trade tensions remain unresolved. China's financial countermeasures. As trade tensions escalate between the United States and China, Beijing has strategically pivoted away from conventional retaliation methods toward developing sophisticated financial alternatives that challenge the dollar-dominated global financial system. Rather than merely responding with matching tariffs, China has activated what the video describes as a different kind of weapon, a financial instrument worth approximately $1.2 trillion that operates silently by moving money from dollars to digital yuan. The digital yuan revolution. China has methodically developed the digital yuan, ECNY, as a strategic financial alternative to the US dollar's global dominance. This isn't simply a digital version of China's physical currency, but represents a comprehensive cross-border payment ecosystem that is encrypted, programmable, and potentially capable of re-engineering the established financial world order. The ECNY functions fundamentally differently from cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin. Unlike decentralized digital currencies, the digital yuan is state-issued, centrally monitored, and, if necessary, reversible, giving Chinese authorities unprecedented control over financial transactions. This centralization allows for real-time settlement, dramatically reduced transaction costs, and the elimination of international intermediaries that have traditionally been required for cross-border payments. According to figures attributed to the People's Bank of China in the video, the ECNY system has reportedly processed over 1.88 trillion yuan, approximately $250 billion, during its pilot phase alone. While the video notes that as of Q1 2025, detailed figures haven't been publicly verified and third-party validation remains limited, the sheer transaction volume indicates significant adoption even in its early stages. What makes the ECNY particularly transformative isn't just the volume of transactions, but the fundamental shift in who controls the flow of money. As the video metaphorically suggests, if the dollar was once the crown of global finance, then ECNY may be crafting a remote control for that crown and quietly taking aim while the rest of the world is still debating whether to raise or lower interest rates. This represents a strategic repositioning that leverages financial technology to create geopolitical advantage. CIPS, the SWIFT alternative. In a parallel development that complements the digital yuan, China has created CIPS, Cross-Border Interbank Payment System, a homegrown alternative to the SWIFT international payment network that has dominated global financial transactions for decades. This system now connects over 1,400 financial institutions across more than 110 countries, creating a parallel financial infrastructure outside traditional Western-dominated channels. The video highlights a critical statistic. Today, approximately 38% of China's global trade no longer goes through SWIFT, but instead runs on CIPS. This represents a significant decoupling from the US-dominated financial system, allowing transactions to occur without touching American banks, using dollars, or subjecting participants to potential US sanctions or oversight. CIPS handles over $83 billion in transactions daily, according to the video, indicating it has moved well beyond the experimental stage to become a fully operational alternative payment infrastructure. The system is described as no longer a test, but rather programmable, fully operational, suggesting its capacity to replace SWIFT functionality for participating nations. The video illustrates this shift with concrete examples: oil purchased with yuan in Kenya, IMF loans partially repaid in yuan in Argentina, reportedly because the country had simply run out of dollars, and the fact that 33% of regional trade between China and Southeast Asia now flows in non-dollar currencies. These examples demonstrate how the alternative payment system is gaining practical, real-world traction. The yuan's growing global share. The effectiveness of these financial countermeasures is evidenced by the remarkable growth in the yuan's share of global transactions. The video states that in just 2 years, the yuan's share has jumped from 1.9% to 6%, a threefold increase that represents one of the fastest expansions of a currency's global usage in modern financial history. This growth isn't occurring out of idealism but out of necessity, as the video frames it. Many countries facing dollar shortages or seeking to reduce vulnerability to U.S. financial sanctions are pragmatically adopting yuan-based transactions. The acceleration of ECNY integration into export trade, following the U.S. imposition of a blanket 60% tariff on Chinese imports in January 2025, further demonstrates how trade tensions directly stimulate alternative financial system adoption. The video highlights that digital yuan usage in trade rose by 19.3% compared to the previous year, while letters of credit denominated in yuan have become financially advantageous, being up to 40 basis points cheaper than dollar-based equivalents. This cost advantage creates a compelling economic rationale for international traders to adopt the Chinese system beyond political considerations. Global adoption of Chinese financial instruments. Perhaps the most tangible evidence of China's successful financial countermeasures is the growing list of countries now actively using ECNY for trade and infrastructure projects. The video specifically mentions Kenya, Malaysia, Indonesia, Laos, and Pakistan among the adopters of Chinese financial instruments for significant economic activities. In Malaysia, local fast payment systems are now directly linked with China's ECNY. Indonesian small businesses are adopting QR code-based ECNY wallets to bypass dollar conversion delays. Within the Belt and Road Initiative, 13 countries are reportedly using ECNY to pay for major infrastructure projects, including Kenya's Mombasa port, Laos's high-speed rail, and Pakistan's Gwadar deep-sea terminal. The video makes a particularly notable claim about the evolution of these financial relationships. Some of these projects now even run on smart contracts, where debt repayments are automated and retractable if partners deviate from terms. This suggests China is leveraging digital currency technology to create programmable financial agreements that can automatically enforce compliance with Chinese terms, a significant advancement over traditional financing arrangements. In the increasingly digitized global economy, China appears to be positioning itself not merely as an alternative to the U.S.-led financial system, but as the architect of a more advanced, efficient system that could eventually render the dollar-based system obsolete. As the video concludes this section, China isn't trying to win the tariff game. They're building a financial firewall, one that dollars may no longer pass through. This encapsulates the strategic nature of China's financial countermeasures. Rather than fighting on the battlefield of tariffs, where the U.S. has traditionally held advantages, China is creating an entirely new financial ecosystem that could fundamentally reshape global economic power dynamics. Escalating tariff war. The trade tensions between the United States and China have reached unprecedented levels, evolving from a strategic negotiation into what many analysts now describe as a full-scale economic confrontation. What began as targeted tariffs on specific sectors has transformed into a comprehensive trade barrier system that threatens to sever one of the world's most important economic relationships. The January 2025 blanket tariff. In January 2025, the United States took a dramatic step by imposing a blanket 60% tariff on all Chinese imports. This sweeping measure represented a significant escalation from the previous sector-specific approach and signaled a fundamental shift in U.S. trade policy toward China. The decision, described in the video as a bold move, was implemented without a gradual phase-in period, sending immediate shockwaves through global supply chains and financial markets. This blanket tariff affected virtually every category of goods imported from China, from consumer electronics and textiles to industrial components and raw materials. The comprehensive nature of the tariff meant that no sector of the Chinese export economy was spared, forcing businesses across China to either absorb the additional costs or pass them on to American buyers. For U.S. importers, the sudden implementation created significant challenges in adjusting procurement strategies, especially for businesses with long-established supply chains in China. Companies that had spent decades developing relationships with Chinese manufacturers found themselves facing an immediate 60% increase in costs, with limited short-term alternatives. The Trump administration's further escalation. Following the initial blanket tariff, the Trump administration continued to ratchet up pressure through a series of graduated increases. According to the video transcript, these escalations followed a rapid pattern. February 10% tariff, March another 10%, then just a week ago a sudden jump to 34%. This accelerating schedule of tariff increases created extraordinary uncertainty in markets, as businesses struggled to plan inventory and pricing strategies amid constantly shifting cost structures. Most alarming for economic analysts was the White House's threat to implement a further 50% hike, which would potentially bring the total U.S. tariffs on Chinese goods to a staggering 104%. The video characterizes this figure as an unthinkable number in the context of international trade relations, representing a de facto prohibition on commerce rather than a negotiating tactic. To put this potential 104% tariff in perspective, the video provides concrete examples of how such measures would affect consumer prices. A $20 toy, now $40. A $400 iPhone, now $800. A car, the price could jump by $6,000 to $12,000 per vehicle. These dramatic price increases would effectively double the cost of many Chinese-manufactured goods for American consumers, potentially triggering significant inflation across multiple retail sectors. The Trump administration reportedly characterized these extreme tariffs as punishment for Beijing, particularly as China had begun to implement its own retaliatory measures. However, economic experts questioned whether such dramatic trade barriers would achieve their stated objectives or instead trigger global economic instability that would harm American interests as well. China's strategic response. China's response to the U.S. tariff escalation has been both measured and strategic, combining conventional tariff responses with more targeted countermeasures designed to leverage China's unique economic strengths. Initially, Beijing matched the U.S. approach by implementing a 34% tariff on all U.S. goods, creating parallel trade barriers that affected American exporters across multiple sectors. However, as noted in the video, that's just the tip of the iceberg. China's more sophisticated response came in the form of export restrictions on rare earth elements, a group of 17 metals that are essential components in high-technology manufacturing. These materials are described as the lifeblood of modern technology, critical for producing electric vehicle batteries, military radars, semiconductors, and night vision devices. The Chinese restriction mechanism was structured as a licensing requirement, whereby U.S. companies wanting these materials must apply for a license, and approval isn't easy. While technically not an outright ban, analysts cited in the video characterized this as a disguised export ban designed to pressure the U.S. technology sector specifically. This approach demonstrated Beijing's strategic thinking. Rather than matching U.S. tariffs dollar for dollar across all sectors, China identified and targeted specific vulnerabilities in the U.S. manufacturing ecosystem. China's rare earth leverage. China's ability to restrict rare earth exports represents a uniquely powerful economic lever due to the country's near monopoly on global supply. According to the video, China controls up to 90% of the global supply of these critical elements. This dominance is the result of decades of strategic investment in mining and processing capabilities, while other countries, including the United States, allowed their domestic rare earth industries to atrophy. Elements mentioned specifically in the video include dysprosium, terbium, and neodymium, unfamiliar names to most consumers, but absolutely essential to modern technology manufacturing. Without reliable access to these materials, U.S. production of everything from smartphones to military equipment would face significant disruptions. The rare earth restrictions therefore represented a targeted response that exploited a specific American vulnerability rather than a blanket counter-tariff. This approach reflects a sophisticated understanding of global supply chains and strategic interdependencies. While the U.S. leveraged its market size and purchasing power through broad tariffs, China countered by exploiting its resource dominance in a critical sector. The contrast highlights the different economic strengths each country brings to the confrontation: America's vast consumer market versus China's control of essential raw materials. The rare earth restrictions also demonstrated China's willingness to use industrial policy as a geopolitical tool, blurring the lines between economic and security considerations. By targeting materials essential to both consumer electronics and defense applications, China signaled that it was prepared to use its resource advantages to counter U.S. trade pressure across multiple domains simultaneously. As this tariff war continues to escalate, both sides appear locked in what the video describes as a game of who blinks first. However, unlike typical economic standoffs, the consequences extend far beyond the two protagonists. The global economy stands on the sidelines and trembling as the world's two largest economies implement increasingly severe trade barriers. The ultimate resolution remains uncertain, but the economic damage accumulates daily, affecting businesses and consumers worldwide who have no direct say in the conflict's trajectory. Economic fallout. The escalating trade war between the United States and China has triggered a cascade of economic consequences that extend far beyond the bilateral relationship